Okay. I call this meeting to order. This is the Public Safety Committee of the City Council. Councilor Davis is excused for this meeting. All other committee members are present today via Zoom. This is a remote or online meeting where all participants will be on a video or audio conference. Members of the public have the opportunity to address the committee if they have signed up for public comment per the rules published on the agenda and on our website Friday. Council staff has informed me that there are no individuals signed up to speak this evening. Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's doing good today. We will now move to agenda item AEC-161. And this is Mayor's recommendation of award ROA for RFP-20 or 2022 231 POL EV CODIS, and it's for DNA testing and analysis services. Move approval.
Okay, second.
Second by Councilor Grout. Councilors, any questions for staff or administration? Do we want to have real quickly, if we can have maybe Chris Silva and give us a quick little update in reference to what this bill entails?
Sure. Thank you, Councilor Sanchez. Councilors, basically the purpose of this EC is to recommend approval of a recommendation reward to Bodie Selmark Forensics. They were one of two applicants who applied to run this forensics CODIS testing. The APD, the Albuquerque Police Department, is able to submit DNA samples to the New Mexico DNA Identification System, or NMDIS, and that's the state crime lab. So with this bill or contract, the police department is able to continue to upload hits to the CODIS system.
Very good.
So
Thank you. One of the things that I think that's important is this particular funding was legislated on the FY20 omnibus bill. This is a continuous funding cycle in which the state sends APD roughly $450,000 per year. Any questions or comments? Okay, councilors, if there's no questions or comments, we'll move to a vote.
Counselor Bassan,
Yes.
Counselor Fiegelkorn,
Yes.
Counselor Grout,
Yes.
and Counselor Sanchez.
Yes.
That passes on a 4-0 vote.
Okay, we'll now move on to agenda item BR-75. On the sponsor R75, establishing a tip line program specifically for the reporting of illegal used or possessed firearms, adjusting fiscal year 2023 appropriations to support the program. Move do pass.
Second.
Thank you. And that was second by Councilor Bassan. Councilors, any questions for staff or administration? None?
No, sorry,
Oh.
Mr. Chair, I do have a
Councilor Bassan, sorry about that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering what APD feels about a tip line, the responses. I mean, I love the idea of making sure that we do whatever we can to find stolen or, you know, any kind of threatening firearms. What about the workload and our staffing problems? And so, I mean, we already are struggling with 311, 242 cops, 911 wait times. So when we're talking about another tip line for someone to answer the phone and report something, what does that look like realistically? I know that ideologically it sounds great, but realistically, how possible is this? And what does the administration think about it?
So, Councilor Bassan, this is Aaron Jones, I'm Commander with the Investigative Services Division. Thank you for the question. We feel very similarly than what you just explained. Obviously, ideologically, this is a fantastic idea, one that I can get behind. Realistically, this is proposed to be taken by the Crime Stoppers unit, which is housed in my division. And we are currently hiring a part-time employee that can assist with the staffing of that. However, by no means can we be able to facilitate currently a 24-hour tip line where we dispatch that 24 hours a day. So that is something that is very adept that you bring that up, because that's something that we're concerned with. We currently do have Crime Stoppers taking tips for gun-related crimes, and those are already being disseminated to the 3 gun violence reduction units that we have, along with our partnerships that we have with our federal partners. So this actually goes right in line with what's already being currently conducted by the department. My biggest concern for the division and it being housed by Crime Stoppers is exactly what you mentioned, being able to realistically and feasible, if this is even going to be feasible for us to be able to maintain and actually house 24 hours a day. So
Thank you, and it's good to see you.
as well, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, I'm wondering, I would love to hear a little bit more about your vision with this, because again, ideologically, I'm totally behind it. But I think that the public has been airing a lot of concerns when they call and they're not receiving help from a lot of people's perspective. So I mean, at this point, I'm kind of almost wondering, what would you think about almost thinking about this a little bit more? Like maybe we start with a tip line, but really almost like leave a message. And then, as we can get to it, or I mean, I just don't know. I don't know if this is going to be something that people are going to be okay with, or if they're going to be more angry when there isn't that immediate reaction and response, or is it going to be problematic if we know about these firearms and we don't go and get them, and we should have? Like, where is the litigation? I mean, that's something even for the city and the risk that we have. Is that something we should be concerned with too? And again, I bring this up because of the staffing issues that we're having as a city, not because I don't support the actual concept.
Well, right now, the staffing issue is something that the administration needs to address, and they need to address that wholeheartedly. What I hear over and over and over again is that the rank and file officers are not feeling supported by the administration. We kind of saw that at the last city council meeting when there was questions that wouldn't be answered about qualified immunity. So what we need to make sure that the administration starts finding ways to actually make sure that we have enough officers out on the streets to answer the calls. And maybe we need to figure out why where it was so top heavy at the police department. I know we can hire people with high salaries, but we're having very, very difficulty retaining the people that we need to have. And that's the individuals who are the rank and file, who are the boots on the ground. And right now we are going backwards in that area. And for us to be moving anything forward, we have a rough time with it, because obviously the administration at the police department doesn't seem to be doing their job in filling the ranks. And that's where we need it. We need the boots on the ground, and we need that. So if you want to get into that discussion, we can get into that discussion as well. But that's where we're at, is we need to hold the current police administration responsible for getting more police and more boots on the ground at this point. And that's where we need to be. And I'd like to ask if we're going to start this discussion, then I'd like to see what we're doing in reference to that as well.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to start this discussion per se regarding that. I think you and I both agree a lot about what you just said, and I think that people are clear about it. However, I guess to me, I wonder if you would be open to deferring this for a month. I would love to talk with you about it. I want to get this going. I'm concerned that this tip line, again, while good intentioned, is actually going to do exactly what you're saying and potentially hinder more of the boots on the ground, rank and file officers who have to check said tip line. or even other employees that are not officers, right? Because I don't think that you're going to have to be a sworn officer to be able to check this tip line. But
No.
if we're going to be adding more to the plate of the boots on the ground, rank and file, while we're also saying that we need to do what we can to support them, my concern is where are we at with that balance and making sure that we're going to do it without having an unintended consequence, which makes the workload even greater when we had a better intention, and that wasn't really what we were looking for. So
And-
again, I agree with you on so much of what you said. I just think that it's very important that we kind of consider the potential unintended consequences and the actual implementation that can happen by having this tip line.
And what I see that we can't wait, because if the tip line's there and the individuals are going to be utilizing it and they have reason to call, if you're in the middle of an emergency situation or you know somebody has a gun, are we going to defer this and for a certain amount of time and then have an individual who could have called or could have reported an illegal firearm or an illegally possessed firearm? And again, I'm not trying to infringe on anyone's Second Amendment right to bear arms. This is only for illegal firearms and illegally possessed firearms. So if we don't act on something like this, then how are we going to ever know whether we could have done something to save someone's life? And that's what the bottom line is we need to save a life. And that's the intention of this bill. And in my opinion, the quicker we get it online and they're starting to take calls and document these things, then we need to get this done. Our job is to make sure that we create the things that are going to make life safer. And then at that point, the police department needs to implement, and they need to hire more people, and they need to find a way to do that. And I think that's the issue that we need to address, is we need to address why the police department can't hire enough people to do these kinds of jobs, why they don't have enough individuals out on the streets, and where that money is being spent. I think that's our job as city council, is to make sure that we do our job to keep people safe. And in my opinion, this bill is a step in that direction to try to keep people safe, and so that people don't get harmed or hurt or injured by an illegally possessed firearm. Councilor Fiebelkorn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for this legislation. I do think it's a really important topic. I just have a couple questions around the feasibility of this. Currently, if I suspect my neighbor has an illegally possessed firearm, I believe I would call Crime Stoppers. And is that true? And if so, what's the process currently in place if I have this concern? What happens within APD? Could somebody from APD answer that question?
Thank you, Councilor Fiebelkorn, for the question. So yes, you can call Crime Stoppers. That is one of the avenues that you can take. If you recall Crime Stoppers, Crime Stoppers is currently housed in the same building as our gun violence units, the units that are tasked with going after all of the gun violence calls in the city. That information would be disseminated to one of the 3 sergeants that works in those units. And if it's involving a group or individual that they're working, that information would be used and acted on immediately to facilitate the investigation that they already have going, or it would initiate a new investigation if it wasn't a group or individual that they were going after. Another method is we have these tips come in through 242 cops. Obviously, as Councilor Sanchez correctly identified, if this is an emergent situation, we as the police department want to be able to handle that right away. And so hopefully in those situations, people would not be calling 242 cops, they would be calling 911 if it was one of those life-threatening emergent situations. Aside from that though, Crime Stoppers would definitely be an appropriate avenue to send that tip. Those tips are disseminated after hours via email, and then during the hours when we're at work or throughout the week, that's disseminated through an email and also a conversation within the building.
So if I called about just, it wasn't an existing crime that's happening. It was just about a suspect neighbor or something like that. That would go in through Crime Stoppers and it would be emailed out and it would be acted upon the next day. Is that correct?
That is a correct assessment. Now, the acted upon the next day, that's where things may vary as far as people's assessment on the action. So when we get a tip in, obviously we have to be able to verify that information and establish a criminal pattern or a criminal predicate or the fact that a law has been violated. So that may take time, but the action is, as far as launching an investigation, you are correct in that. That would be upon the officers receiving the tip and starting an investigation. And that could be, through various different methods, whether it's surveillance, whether it's contacting the neighbor, oftentimes through Crime Stoppers, and anonymity is very important with Crime Stoppers. And so using that forum, we may not be able to talk to the neighbor. And obviously there's a degree of comfort in being able to provide a tip in an anonymous fashion. So, that's something that I think that we should consider is when we receive tips, oftentimes it's what breaks cases open. We know that was the case with the Saeed case earlier in the year with the Muslim murders. But being able to contact the people that are tipping, that's generally something that we don't do in Crime Stoppers because it has an anonymous forum. So in those cases where we would be able to contact them, email or 242 cops would probably be the preferred method.
And under this bill, Mr. Chair, would there be an anonymous reporting option if you called out the tip line? That could be.
Yes, there would be. And it's also going to be an informational line. You're going to have individuals who actually have a question on whether they should call the police or not. Somebody may be discharging a firearm nearby. Then they may not know what to do. If they can call this tip line, maybe at that point they can. You never know. This tip line or this call might coincide with a call for service from APD. And at that point, the individuals could be able to transmit more information to the officer who's responding to that call, or even upgrade the call depending on what the situation might be. You also have a situation where you might have an illegal gun in the school system. Sure, the Crime Stoppers system is going to deal with that as well. But what if somebody doesn't know what to do? And going back to that same scenario, at that point they can call and they can speak to the individual who answers the tip line with all the pertinent information that they gather. And who knows, maybe we can take guns off the streets or out of the schools with just a phone call, and that right there could save somebody's life. So in my opinion, I think this is something that needs to be pushed through pretty quick so that we can make sure that we are saving lives. That's, in my opinion, the bottom line.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple more questions. So from what I was hearing, if I make a tip, it goes out via email, it goes to an officer, the action on that starts the next day during regular working hours. Is part of the concern and part of the reason for this tip line is that we think that reaction should be quicker, or is it really more of the kind of education and working with the public like you were just describing, Mr. Chair?
I think it's both. So if you have the tip line and it's working after hours, like let's say, for example, on Saturday night when most of these calls happen, or Friday night when most of these calls happen, I know that APD could probably say some of these tips would coincide with the actual calls for service that they're receiving. And it's my hope that APD and the tip line would get with radio dispatch, and that the dispatch would talk to the tip line, or tip line would talk to the dispatch. And at that point, they could determine how important that call is. So many times we hear calls that are missed, calls that aren't attended to. If we have maybe that extra bit of information from the tip line, Somebody may be working on the hours when these kinds of things happen most, then that information can be relayed to the officers or to dispatch that's on scene. And then at that point, the officers can maybe make that a higher priority call and get there and possibly save someone's life.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a couple more questions.
Sure.
How many illegal gun tips are we getting on an annual basis or a monthly basis? Is there any tracking of that type of tip that's going in right now?
I don't know. I'd have to defer to possibly anybody at Crime Stoppers may have that information, but right now, this bill also has a component for public service announcements, for letting people know what to do. It's educational as well. And I think the educational component is very, very necessary to be out as soon as possible as well. And it'll give you an idea of what you need to do if you run across illegal firearm. We're looking at possible billboards and then just some other public service type announcements as well.
I definitely support that kind of education and outreach to the community. I'm just wondering if anybody maybe from APD has the number of reports that we're getting. Is that something that we could get maybe?
So Crime Stoppers does keep, obviously we have a list of the tips that we get in. I'll need to look at the bylaws from Crime Stoppers to see how that information is collected and also how it can be disseminated, but that's something I can do tomorrow and then get to the appropriate people on your side, Counselor.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that, because here's my concern. Back to some of the things that Councilor Bassan was bringing up. I'm worried that we're going to have someone dedicated to this tip line, and there's not, they're not going to be fully engaged 24/7 with tips. And I worry that we could be using them for additional kinds of tips. And so I kind of wonder if it wouldn't be better to do all the education and outreach that's in this bill, but have the tips still go through a Crime Stopper or something like that, so that those people are not dedicated solely to these kind of tips, unless you come back to me tomorrow and say there's, we're getting hundreds of these tips, and then I might change my mind. I do want to verify that the folks that would be answering this tip line are not APD officers. Is that correct? They would be just like perhaps administrative staff that's answering the phone and then passing it on to APD officers.
And the way I see it is maybe not, but if you had any experience with any of the individuals who are trained and working the Crime Stoppers channels, they are very, very knowledgeable in what they need to do and the path that they need to take based on the phone call, the type of tip. And if they need to, they know exactly to get on the phone and get radio dispatched immediately. So that's just some of the experience that I've had in my past with Crime Stoppers. And of course, as we move forward, I think that the individual who is assigned will even get better and better and better. And you want to do a couple of things here. You're going to have documentation as to what's going on. You're going to have an education as to what's going on, and then you're going to have the cross-referencing of radio to the tip line, which could actually save people's lives. Also, if you ended up having a situation that's connected to ShotSpotter, because this also has that ShotSpotter component, at that point you can cross-index the ShotSpotter to the radio dispatch and also to the tip line. And all three of those in conjunction could actually mean that you get out there and you're handling an investigation a lot quicker with a lot more information than you would have in the first place.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last question. The $100,000 appropriation, if we're going to be hiring people to staff a 24/7 tip line, that doesn't seem like enough. So I'm just wondering what was considered when we came up with $100,000 for the appropriation.
Well, what we were doing is we were trying to make sure that we had somebody that was well-versed, somebody that can actually handle the situation. If you've ever worked at APD, everybody gets a little bit more money for working swing shift and weekends instead of having a really nice shift. You know, the day shift guys, they don't get the extra benefits that a swing shift or a graveyard officer would get. So I think my idea in that is to, you know, make sure that the person is getting paid and is also doing the tracking and has some sort of database to make sure that that there's some accountability as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So maybe I misunderstood. So it wouldn't be multiple people. It would be one person staffing the tip line and then perhaps have off hours where it wasn't being monitored.
No, what I'm saying is you'd have somebody actually working in the high value times. So when these things happen, I mean, we can get somebody at the police department to put a pie chart together, and I'm sure that they're going to come up with a certain time where we're going to be having more calls, and at that point we staff appropriately during that time. And if it means that two individuals work, if it means that somewhere along the line there might be a need for overtime because this is proving to be successful, we might also need some more tracking, maybe a database, maybe some sort of program to actually monitor and make sure that we're following up.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
do you mind if I just jump in? Because I
No,
think
go
I
ahead.
have some context for Councilor Feeblecorn's questions, because you directed council staff to be meeting with folks on this since September. And I can report that we did meet with the Crime Stoppers liaison at APD, a woman by the name of Sonia Marquez. I don't believe that she's a sworn officer, but she is, from our understanding, based on our conversation with her, the person that staffs the Crime Stoppers tip line. So the tip line that's contemplated here would not be a separate tip line from Crime Stoppers. It would simply be referring people to that Crime Stoppers tip line. And the appropriation that's proposed within the bill, as the bill is written, was not contemplated necessarily to staff officer overtime, although clearly based on the comments from APD, that may be an appropriate thing to consider in staffing issues. That appropriation at this time, as written in the bill, was intended to fund two things. Number one, the outreach component of the tip line to get the word out to the public. And number two, to actually fund the reward aspect of Crime Stoppers. So in the event that you leave a tip that results in something fruitful for APD and its law enforcement function, that money would be intended to give the Crime Stoppers reward that would be associated with that. As reported by APD earlier, Ms. Marcus did report to us that she anticipated getting another part-time or full-time staffer that would also assist with monitoring that tip line. At the time of that meeting, at least, there wasn't a big discussion about these tips potentially overloading the tip line. At that time, you know, Ms. Marcus, obviously being a great city employee in her role, was at least optimistic about being able to continue to manage that, although recognizing that she was pretty busy already. And another component of it that we spoke about with APD is this multi-jurisdictional aspect. So a component of the bill that speaks to Councilor Bassan's inquiry and Councilor Feeblecorn's follow-up questions is this notion that directing the city to begin to attempt a multi-jurisdiction collaboration to staff that tip line, whether it be through BCSO, through the FBI, or through other entities that are similarly concerned with illegal firearms on the street. So to the extent that that could be executed and get these resources from outside agencies, that might help with staffing. And that was part of what the direction council staff was given to put into this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Melendez. That was very helpful. So I have one more question because that raised another one for me. So I want to make sure I understand. We're saying that the calls that come in on this tip line would basically be just an additional line going into Crime Stoppers. And we would be using the same staff as Crime Stoppers. So there's no need to add additional staff per se. It's an additional line that can be dedicated within the existing employee structure. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair and Counselor Sanchez, if I may, you as the sponsor, when we were first asked to evaluate this, we began evaluating with Crime Stoppers because they had the existing infrastructure to potentially facilitate this type of tip line. And so the way that you stated it is actually accurate as it's being proposed at this time, so that folks' tips would go directly into Crime Stoppers because they already have basically the Crime Stoppers infrastructure to kind of facilitate this type of thing. And so from that perspective, it would just be more of making people aware of what they can do in order to report illegal firearms through Crime Stoppers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was really helpful.
Mr. Chair, just want to let you know that Councilor Grout has her hand up, and so does DC Barker's
Yes.
also on it. If there's any comments?
I
Mr.
see it.
Chair.
Thank you. Counselor Grout and then Cecily Barker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chris answered several of my questions. One of them was, are we going to have a separate phone number that will go into the Crime Stoppers? Or are we going to, can we just maybe market more of Crime Stoppers to let people aware, let them know? I think adding another phone number is kind of not a great idea. That's my thought, but Chris.
No,
actually,
I don't think there's any change to that. Just as Mr. Melendrez stated, that infrastructure is already in place.
Okay. All right. I think it's important to get illegal firearms off the street. So I agree with that. And I love seeing all the different agencies working together. I think that's huge. So.
Deputy Chief Barker.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and council members. I just want to express from the Albuquerque Police Department, this is a very important subject for us. As Commander Jones stated, we do have our gun violence teams that actively work these tips. And in addition to our Crime Stoppers, I just also want to note that the ATF also has a tip line where people can call in and report crimes involving guns. I think adding another phone number would be duplicative, but I do think that education would be imperative for our gun violence efforts at this time, and APD would absolutely support that portion of this bill.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Oh, Councilor Bassan, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So given what I've heard and kind of what I've learned and what I'm still learning, I think that it seems like this is going to be quite duplicative. And again, I think that there's good intention here, but what can we do to add the education aspect in with Crime Stoppers or improve Crime Stoppers? What can we do to fund that rather than create a new tip line or another avenue where it goes in? And then, maybe we should spend the money and any kind of funding or, instead of studies or other directives per se, on doing an ad campaign or an educational campaign to notify the public to say, if you know or suspect someone of having an illegal firearm, call Crime Stoppers anonymously. Because if people don't know, and if ATF has a number and Crime Stoppers has a number and APD does a, investigatory task force, and if all of that stuff happens, like, why don't we invest the funding in increasing? Because I know, Mr. Chair, you keep talking about education and making sure people are aware of it. And I think that's the nail on the head. Most people aren't aware of it. I think I didn't necessarily, until recently, I didn't really think about reporting any kind of illegal gun ownership personally. But I think that it is important for a lot of people to be aware of that. And I think, let's take out some billboards in the city. I can't imagine that if we're going to do something like that, let's spend the money educating the public about what already exists. And then let's maybe find a way to improve what we have, because I think that this is so important, but I really think that it is duplicative from what I'm understanding. And to me, I don't think that necessarily doing another effort with the same kind of outcome, I think that might hinder some of our resources rather than actually use them wisely.
Mr. Melendez, I know we've gone over this. If you can go ahead and expand on that one.
Mr. Chair, I think the only thing that I have to offer in addition that might be helpful to the committee's deliberation this evening is that in our discussions with Ms. Marcus at Crime Stoppers and with APD as the Crime Stoppers liaison, and in my sort of institutional recollection of the council, the city council has previously funded money for Crime Stoppers. I believe that Councilor Davis sponsored a bill a couple of years ago that put $25,000 toward Crime Stopper funding for, I believe it was for firearms as well. And so it's not Crime Stoppers' first rodeo in that sense with respect to what's being contemplated here. The component that is new with this bill is the direction to attempt a multi-jurisdictional approach and to also fund an outreach campaign to educate the public.
Mr. Chair, may I respond to that and ask another question?
Yes.
Sure, thank you. So when it comes to multi-jurisdictional too, I mean, everything I'm seeing on the ABCGC committee is proving it very difficult to get collaboration between different political entities, much less when we're talking about law enforcement and any other avenues that we were going to be talking about. So what would be the process? What do we, if we were to pass this tonight and move it to full council and then pass it, like really, what would be the end result before we had to, like, aren't we going to have to talk to all these other jurisdictions as well and make sure that they're on board and they approve it? And then, so to me, as much as I see the urgency in making sure that we get illegal guns off the street and we do everything we can to educate the public, I don't see how rushing this through per se at this point is going to be as beneficial as we want it to be, because I think we're going to run up against some dead ends that we're going to have to figure out how to navigate through.
One of the things that I envision is I envision this growing from where this is right now. I've spoken to the police department. I've spoken to Mr. Melendez, council services, and this is just a very, very, very beginning portion of what I think should be out there. And my vision of this whole thing is having individuals who can investigate gun crimes, having individuals working the streets at one point to do something in the after hours. I would like this to grow. I would like this to be a situation where all the different aspects are looked at. You have ShotSpotter, you have the tip line, you have the education portion of it, and then you have the investigators who would be going after it. I'd like to see a multi-jurisdictional task force put together to actually address this. And the reason why is because we do know we have a shortage of manpower. The other agencies will definitely help. If it comes through a APD, we're still going to be in a situation where we need to get people out there to handle the calls. And if the FBI or maybe the sheriff's department or maybe any department, even APS police comes across something, if you man this with a multi-jurisdictional task force, then you have individuals who can be called on by that individual who's taking the phone calls, and they can make that phone call to that jurisdiction or that area of need. If maybe it is APS, maybe we do get a tip line through APS. Well, at that point, the multi-jurisdictional operation comes into effect, and maybe you send a police officer from our gun violence unit and he meets with a APS police officer, and then they walk into that APS school and they take that gun away from that individual. So I think that multi-jurisdictional aspect is very, very important, and the educational component is very, very important. And again, my whole reasoning to put this bill together was to actually make sure that we save lives. I don't want to see an illegal gun take people's lives. We know that's not going to ever stop. We know it's going to probably continue. But if we can somehow find a way or a method and work together with the police department and the other agencies in the area to start addressing the situations and making sure that we have a little bit safer community, that's the intention of this bill. And the reason why I thought about bringing this bill to light had to do with just that, the component of making sure that people stay safe. And I don't know if it was Councilor Feeblecorn or Councilor Grout that was first.
Grout.
Councilor Grout.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is the Crime Stoppers tip line, is it open 24/7? Anybody?
Mr. Chair, yes, it is based on, again, our discussion with Ms. Marquez back in September. It is open 24 hours. It is my understanding that is staffed during daytime hours, and then tip lines at night can be dispatched the next day.
Okay. And one follow-up question. I think that we should have a big campaign educating our public about calling about illegal firearms to Crime Stoppers and do it kind of that way. I'm not sure that, while I think this is very well intended, I do think it's duplicative. And I want to get the illegal firearms off the streets too. And I think we just need to educate the public better. We can even do PSAs. Those are pretty inexpensive. You can do them. That's it.
Councilor Feeblecorn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am just wondering if I hear complete agreement about all of the bullet points on page 2. I think we all want to see a collaboration with the Crime Stoppers. We want to see a multi-jurisdictional task force. We want to offer and deliver cash rewards. We want a publicity campaign to promote, these kind of tips, and we want to report back to City Council. I don't hear anybody arguing that. So I'm wondering if you might be open, Mr. Chair, to just a change on page 2, lines 9 and 10, that I think is where we're all getting kind of a feel that there's duplication, that maybe we could change to where we would say that we're going to establish, and I'm making these words up, we can change it, but establish an illegal firearms reduction program that has all of those things that I just listed out in it. I think it's when we start saying that we're going to establish a tip line that we feel like we're doing the duplication. So I would say if we could just change the wording on that one sentence, to me, that would solve the issues that I've explained, and I feel like I'm hearing from the other counselors as well. And it would keep all of the important parts of this bill, which I think are very, very important, particularly for me, the campaign, the public outreach campaign and the rewards for Crime Stopper tips. All of that stuff is so incredibly important. I don't want to lose that. So that would be my suggestion. I just wanted to get Mr. Chair's feedback on that before I move a amendment or anything like that.
Okay, which one was it again?
So, Mr. Chair, I would suggest on page 2, lines 9 and 10, where it now says shall establish a firearms tip line program, that we rephrase that to say shall establish an illegal firearms reduction program. And then leave it where it has all of the bullet points underneath it. Because that's not duplicating any of these efforts. It's really just spelling them all out as a entire program to reduce the number of illegal firearms on the streets.
Okay, I'm up for that. I'm up for taking a look at it a little bit more thoroughly with everyone. I think it's something that maybe we can all look at, because it seems like there's very, very small tweaks that we need to do here. Let's hear from Deputy Chief Barker. Sorry.
That's okay. Mr. Chair, members of the council, I just want to reiterate, I know it's been discussed a little bit this evening, but I want to make it clear that we do have collaboration and we do work closely with our federal partners. That includes the ATF, who is embedded with our gun violence teams, who is doing training with them and working operations with them. We do have a program in the schools where there is education so that individuals can report firearms and the illegal use of them. We have the Joint Terrorism Task Force, where we have members of our department that works closely with the FBI and handles gun violence tips coming in about the schools. They follow up on those leads with our FBI partners. Commander Sanders is here if we needed to go into further efforts into CJIC and the NIBIN testing as far as our firearms. We, again, are working very, very closely with ATF, getting another NIBIN machine in. We think that we can do many things to improve and increase these efforts. And I would agree with what Councillor Fiebelkorn has recommended. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. And Councilor Bassan.
Mr. Chair, and actually DC Barker pointed out a lot of what some of the additional questions I was going to ask, but the one thing that I want to confirm, which, well, I know the answer to, but at the same time, Crime Stoppers gives out cash rewards, right? So again, I feel like this is something that is, you know, I don't support this as it is, even though ideally I do. So with Councillor Fiebelkorn's, suggestion, I think that that's just another indicator to me that we need to talk about this more. I'm not going to vote on an amendment based off of let's change this. So I would like to make a motion to defer for 30 days or till the next Public Safety Committee meeting. Okay,
we have a motion. And I think I got a second from Councillor Grout. And me being the sponsor, I am okay with that. I'm really glad we had this discussion. Really enjoyed the discussion, and I think this is something that we can really work through and get taken care of. So I think this is something that we need that we're going to be able to answer and get a lot more feedback from, and make sure that we have every question answered so that we can start saving some lives.
Yes.
So let's go ahead and move to a vote. And this is the vote for the deferral, correct?
Yes.
And the deferral would be for December 13th. Councillor Bassan?
Yes.
Councillor Fiebelkorn?
Yes.
Councillor Grout?
Yes.
Councillor Sanchez?
Yes.
And that passes on a 4-0 vote.
Okay, folks, thank you for being with us tonight. I appreciate everyone's time. And there being no further business, this Public Safety Committee is adjourned. Thank you.